Today we are inaugurating a cycle on narrative techniques, that is, resources used to tell stories not only by screenwriters, but also by novelists, storytellers or authors from any narrative medium. Some of these techniques come from literature, others from psychology, and many have been developed directly in audiovisual language. But in any case, they are resources that all scriptwriters must know and practice. Today we begin with the classic, the Cliffhanger. And I say classic because although it is a term that has now become fashionable with the boom of the series, its origin dates back to the 19th century, as we will see below. What is a Cliffhanger? The Cliffhanger, literally hanging from a cliff, which can also be translated as on the edge of the abyss, is a narrative technique used at the end of a scene, usually at the end of a chapter in a work of fiction, series, comic book, film, video game, to generate suspense and engage the viewer, and make him or her interested in seeing the result in the next installment. It is a very visual word. The author metaphorically leaves the character hanging on the cliff and finishes the narration until some time later, a day, a week or a few months later, if it is the end of a season, or even 25 years later. If we talk about Twin Peaks, the narration is resumed, and it is resolved what happened with that character who was hanging on the cliff. The Cliffhanger can be simply an image, an action, or perhaps just a sentence, depending on the medium and the type of story. There are two requirements for an action to be a Cliffhanger. The action of the scene is unfinished. The characters are left in a complicated and unexpected situation whose resolution generates a suspense. What will happen? It happens before a pause in the narration. It can be a short pause, if the series goes to commercial or the book finishes a chapter, a medium pause, if the series finishes the episode, or it is a novel in weekly installments, or a long pause if the series finishes the season, or it is a book that will continue in other publications. The idea of leaving the spectator halfway is something almost as old as literature itself. Even in the Thousand and One Nights, Scheherazade used the resource in a recurrent way when it left the king wanting to know what was going on, and thus postponed, at least for one day, his execution. The word Cliffhanger appeared in the Oxford Dictionary in 1937. It has its origin in the serialized novel A Pair of Blue Eyes, from the year 1873. It was published in newspapers with monthly chapters, and its writer, Thomas Hardy, decided one day to leave his protagonist literally hanging from a cliff at the end of one of the deliveries. The resource was so effective that it quickly became a cliché among serial writers, and was used in the Victorian novel, as well as in the French serial or American pulp fiction. Then the Cliffhanger evolved and jumped to other media such as radio, comics, serial cinema and, finally, to the medium that has put the term on everyone's lips: television. The first time I remember it was with the mythical shooting of J.R., the bad guy from Dallas, who was shot by someone we didn't see in his office. I still have in my mind the question that was advertised for months until the series returned: who shot J.R.? Currently, some series have made the Cliffhangers one of their hallmarks, such as 24, Prison Break, Alias, Galactica, Game of Thrones, The Walking Dead. The end of the season of Lost is also mythical. The first one, with the opening of the hatch that showed that there was life on that island, or the third season in which they changed the existing flashback structure to something else, flash forward, time travel, flash sideways, and ended with it, we have to go back. That left us all upside down. The Cliffhanger is a very effective resource in media that divides the narration into deliveries, numbers or chapters, to keep the viewer, reader or player on edge until the outcome of the situation. Interestingly, it has a scientific explanation in a psychological phenomenon called the Zeigarnik effect, which states that we tend to remember unfinished or interrupted tasks more easily than those that have been completed. Psychologist Blooma Zeigarnik became interested in this phenomenon when she observed how a waiter was able to easily remember a long list of pending orders, yet could hardly remember the dishes he had just served. In 1927, Zeigarnik published a study about this phenomenon, which would later take his name. According to Wikipedia. To carry out this study, he took a certain group of subjects who had to perform a series of 18 to 21 successive tasks, enigmas, arithmetic problems, manual tasks. Half of these tasks were interrupted before the individuals could finish them. It was precisely the interrupted and structured tasks that the subjects evoked most strongly afterwards. What is a Cliffhanger for? It generates suspense. It is the classic what will happen that creates curiosity, hook and loyalty. The viewer is involved in the development of the plot and is interested in what happens to the characters. If one of them is in danger or something surprising is revealed, they will want to see how that situation is resolved. It gives continuity to the story. It links some episodes with others and gives union to the narration. Sometimes a lot of time passes between the last chapter of one season and the first one of the next. The Cliffhanger will help us link the story by solving that tension or enigma that was interrupted. It serves as a selling point and attraction for future plots and stories. At the end of the season of a series, you can advance plots of the next one to generate curiosity. For example, the end of the second season of Narcos. With Pablo Escobar dead, the question arises, what will the next season be about? In the last episode we are given clues to future conflicts. Or in the end of the first season of Stranger Things, when the officer leaves Eleven's favorite food in the woods, implying that he hasn't died. Sometimes plots are opened, like in the fourth season of Masters of Sex, and never close because the series is cancelled. It helps to remember the story. As we explained, thanks to the Zeigarnik effect, interrupted plots are remembered more than those that have already been completed. This helps us remember the story until it comes back in the next installment. Now, how to use a Cleffinger. The Cleffinger has two phases: the approach and the resolution. The approach is the moment when we generate tension, endanger our character or open the mystery. After the pause comes the resolution, and how that interrupted sequence ends is shown. Depending on when the resolution arrives, we can talk about different types. Resolution within the delivery, episode, book, video game. Resolution out of delivery, episode, book, video game, movie, in the next episode. In the next season. No resolution. Series that are cancelled or series with open endings like The Sopranos. Its creator, David Chase, always resisted to solve the doubt of if Tony Soprano lives, leaving that fade to black in the middle of what seems a monotonous familiar dinner in a restaurant, the one that speaks for itself. But when it was over, it was truly amazing. Some viewers called HBO technical support because they thought there had been a problem with their connection, and they missed the end of the episode. But no, The Sopranos really does end with a big Cleffinger. Cleffinger Principle. The dramatic intensity of a Cleffinger is directly proportional to the time it takes to resolve it. If the pause is short, it should not be too dramatic not to saturate. The most spectacular Cleffingers should be left for the end of the season. Klefenger Theorem. The secret of the Cleffinger lies not in creating it, but in solving it satisfactorily. You have to be honest with the Cleffingers and keep your promises. It doesn't work to generate expectation and then solve it in a forced, pathetic or irrelevant way for the story, because it could destroy the interest of the reader, player or spectator at a stroke. In film, the Cleffinger is used in sagas to hook a movie with the following. Many will remember Cleffingers as those of The End of the Empire Strikes Back or Kill Bill Volume 1. In video games, the Cleffinger is used when making sequels. If you already have a trilogy in mind, for example, it is normal that the first two games end up with a Cleffinger that leaves an enigma to be solved in the next game. In comics, the Cleffinger is usually created at the bottom of the page on the right, odd, in order to generate a momentum to pass the page. We don't always have to hang from the Clefar characters at the bottom of the page, remember the beginning of the Cleffinger, but we do have to create enough interest and curiosity for the reader to continue reading until the end. And lastly, to talk about a little-known Cleffinger, but which we as screenwriters must handle. I am referring to a Cleffinger that is not made for the spectators, but for the readers of our script. That is, to create Cleffingers in the scripts themselves, especially in the first pages. In production companies there are often mountains of unread scripts, and it takes the readers of scripts a maximum of 10 pages to know whether they are interested in our script or not. We have to make sure that at the end of the first page they feel like going to the second and then to the third and fourth. If we manage to go beyond the first 10 pages, we will have made the hardest journey. And for this it can help us to place a Cleffinger at the end of each page. It doesn't have to be something spectacular, but it does have to generate an unknown that motivates them to continue reading. That's the end of today's video, where we've seen what a Cleffinger is, and how to create one.